Dan Quinn first hired the defensive coordinator, Wit Jr., who was with him in Dallas most recently. Interestingly about Wit Jr., he wasn't just a defensive coach. He was the passing game coordinator.
No, for the secondary. It's for defense, from the defensive perspective. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't interpret it that way.
You got thrown. You got thrown by
he's
that.
a defensive guy.
Yeah.
I've never heard that term that way.
I've seen some other guys that have had that label too. I think it's a relatively recent one.
I was hoping he had some offensive experience.
No, I think he's been working with Dan since 2020 in Atlanta.
Yep.
I like it just on this side of the ball just because there's two guys there. Obviously, Dan Quinn's got his own chops. He loves this guy, Wit, because he's worked with him. And if you take two, key defensive coaches from Dallas, you got to like that.
Definitely helps.
Just from that perspective alone.
You love poaching from your in-division opponents.
You could quibble and say he's another Ron Rivera and he hasn't distinguished himself as a head coach. Okay, that's your opinion. That's fair. But you can't really quibble with, I don't think, with his defensive chops. And I'm glad he's got Wit to be sort of the D coordinator so he doesn't have to get caught up in the weeds and all that. But they're clearly on the same page, having worked together for several years. So from a defensive perspective, I don't know.
It makes sense.
It makes sense. And
there
I
was
like
some
it.
thought that Wit was going to be the defensive coordinator replacement for Quinn in Dallas.
So Dallas is frustrated.
Yeah. So
because they're like the Ravens. Their staff is getting picked apart.
But Wit was the passing game coordinator for Green Bay, passing game coordinator for Cleveland, and then he went to Atlanta, like
which
you said.
we clearly need help
and
with.
then Dallas. So he's got some experience at that particular
considering
position.
all of our secondary issues.
He can come in and help coach up Forbes, who clearly struggled as a rookie. Quan Martin showed some flashes toward the end of the season, but he's got some young pieces there to work with.
I thought, in fairness, that Forbes had moments too. I mean, he got torched early by A.J. Brown, and that kind of set the tone for this kind of negative look. But I thought at times Forbes played okay.
The weird part is he wasn't playing that much.
Right.
He was getting benched for a while.
Right. But then when he came back, I thought there were some days where he played okay.
So Wit Jr. follows Dan Quinn. He'll be the defensive coordinator for the Commanders. And then they get a big name on the offensive side. We put it up as the Junkies poll of the day. Most people seem to like it.
Mm-hmm.
Kliff Kingsbury is your offensive coordinator
that was a shock
here
to me.
for the Washington Commanders.
He looked like he was headed to the Vegas Raiders. And
negotiations fell apart.
Then he slammed on the brakes.
Must have been over money. Was it over money?
I don't know.
Must be. Once it gets down to negotiations.
I'm just going to assume that Washington came in with a better offer.
Well, they did say that talks broke down.
They said talks broke down.
Or maybe he'd rather work with the number 2 pick than with Aiden O'Connell or whatever the Raiders are going to do.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
There's some rumors the Raiders might end up with Russell Wilson. But Kliff Kingsbury, you can vote at Junks Radio. It's brought to you by Van Meter Homes. 86% like it.
He's
so
a big
far.
name because when he's in college, he's worked with a bunch of different quarterbacks. He was at Texas Tech and.
He worked with Mahomes
and Baker Mayfield.
Manziel.
And he also worked, obviously, with Kyler Murray since his rookie year. And the numbers got better with Kyler Murray until he got hurt. So
in the middle of his tenure there, they were top 10. They were 7th and 8th in offense.
So he's a big name, and I think he'll be good with whatever quarterback they draft.
I think it's a nice combo. So for everyone that was kind of upset about bringing in a mid-50s guy or whatever Quinn is, to 53. Bring him in, bring this old guy in there, and then not have this young, innovative mind. Well, you can say what you want about Kingsbury's success as a head coach, but he knows how to dial
He's
up
kind
offense.
of like that guy. I mean, he's older than the guys who are in their mid-30s, but he's that sexy offensive mind, the good-looking dude that everyone wanted for the head coach.
Yeah.
So how much influence will he have on the number 2 pick?
I don't know.
Sure,
people immediately were like, Coach Caleb, are we going to trade up for Caleb?
Well, they are stockpiling Caleb fanboys in that front office because Spielman loves him, raves about him.
Yeah. But Spielman's job should be done now with the Commanders.
Possibly.
His job was to hire, and this is what he said on his podcast. I heard him say it on his podcast. Maybe it changed, but him and Myers are brought in to bring in the coach and the GM.
They got him.
Well,
job's done.
But I'm going to guess Harris is probably going to still listen to him if he
I think Myers is going to be longer term. I don't know about Spielman.
Maybe.
I think he alluded to it.
I saw Myers on TV this weekend.
No, he's still going to do that, but he's still going to be a reference, I think, for them.
Yeah.
Well, the interesting thing is,
and I'd be fine with that.
The interesting thing is, I was listening to Comm's podcast as I was driving in again. It's kind of like my routine in the morning, and John pointed out, and I wasn't aware that they ran the same system at Carolina with Sam and with Drake May. And he was going back and forth with one of the coaches over there, and they were like, yeah, the system's basically identical. Like the air raid system that kind of stems from Mike Leach that Kingsbury learned from. This guy would also learn from Kingsbury. They would sit in meetings together and everything. He's like, the system's very similar. So you've got the Caleb Williams connection, obviously, and you've got the Drake May connection.
Do you see the pictures of Drake May and Sam Howell?
Yes, at the Carolina game.
Such a stark difference in size.
Yeah. And you see Sam all in his phone. He's always all in his phone. No, for sure. It was very cool.
I think the biggest question a lot of times with guys like Kingsbury is, does it fit with a defensive coach, right? Because the entire premise of the Mike Leach offense is tempo, tempo, tempo. There's very little pre-snap motion. It's get the 4 wide receivers on the line with 1 running back, get them out there, and as soon as they're ready to snap the ball. And
you would think Quinn would know what he's getting into.
Absolutely, and Kingsbury has had success, but one of the knocks against him is that teams always, once they kind of see it and get used to it, they kind of figure it out a little bit because there's not a lot of changes. It's the same thing. They're just doing the same routes tree over and over again. You're not trying to confuse anybody. You're just doing your thing and having the defense try to beat you.
Yeah, I think
it'll be an improvement over Bieniemy's offense. It has to be.
Well,
yeah, probably.
It has to be.
See what kind of talent they bring in. But with Kingsbury, he's...
And I don't think anybody's going to race out there to hire him as a head coach. Like, he could even be Kingsbury. So if Kingsbury has success, people still have questions maybe about him as a head coach.
Based on what happened,
Yeah, and so I think he could be here for a couple years.
I will say this. Kyler Murray's tough to deal with.
For sure.
He's very difficult to deal with.
For sure.
Seems like a bit of a head case.
But people were actually criticizing USC's offense, too, though.
This year it wasn't as good as the year before.
Yeah, but they still scored a ton of points. But who knows?
I always feel like that's Lincoln Riley's offense, though.
Well, I mean, Kingsbury was just kind of working with the quarterback. So, I don't think he wasn't the offensive coordinator. He was kind of working with the quarterback. So who knows how much input he had week to week on the offensive game plan. But he's got a pretty good reputation as an offensive guy. And now it's just about bringing in, whatever quarterback at 2, and then how you're going to surround them with more weapons. I would assume they're going to put more weapons out there.
I wonder if this colors how people feel about the Quinn hire now. Now that you see the big 3, this is their big 3, right? Your OC, your DC, and your head coach.
Sure.
Do you like it a little more now? I would think you have to. I saw the results of your early poll, and it was like overwhelming.
People really like Kingsbury.
That's like 85%.
I put a poll up yesterday before Kingsbury was hired, when you just heard the names Kingsbury and Chip Kelly, and it was overwhelming in Kingsbury's column. Chip Kelly, man, that's like poison here, apparently. Nobody wants Chip Kelly.
Funny, coaches are very high on him. They think he's like a genius. But I think the Kingsbury hire is probably about as good as you could do.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Kingsbury's offense in Arizona for 4 years averaged about 25 a game.
Right.
What does the
Turner Bieniemy offense average? 18, 19 in that range?
Yeah,
around there.
We'd win markedly more games.
Now, Kingsbury had a quarterback that could, certainly run. They can move the ball that way. They had Hopkins.
No doubt.
That's what you wonder. Like, Kingsbury, at least
he had
recently,
something to do with that.
He worked with a dual-threat quarterback.
Yes.
Let's say Caleb goes number 1 to Chicago, and there's no trade. Is Kingsbury going to prefer a Jaden Daniels type who's a dual threat, or Drake May, who is less of a dual threat?
It's going to have to be in tandem with Peters. It can't just be what the OC wants. Like, it's going to be a group collective decision.
Yeah, I don't know.
We'll find out.
I think it's interesting that he runs the exact same offense that Drake May ran in college. So did Sam, but I think everyone assumes that they're going to try to upgrade that with a little more talent.
I feel like the tempo thing, though, Drab, correct me if I'm wrong, like when Chip Kelly first came to the NFL.
That was his thing.
His first year was like crazy tempo. And then the NFL slowed everybody down by like making the referee go to the center, and they like make sure everything's set. and you just don't see that tempo, that crazy tempo like you see in college football.
You can't do it at the same speed as college football.
Correct.
It's still about getting your receiver. I mean, DeAndre Hopkins lined up in the same spot under Kingsbury 88% of the time.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
They're just getting to the line and snapping the ball a lot. I mean, not that he can't make adjustments. He just they run a lot of that 10 personnel for wide receiver sets. And
what I saw for the resume, you could look up the exact numbers, but that overall his 3 years in Arizona, the offenses did get better, but they were kind of middle of the pack.
Well, it's the first and last season they were like in the 20s, but in the second and third they were like 7th and 8th.
Yeah.
So you take it for what it's worth.
Yeah, they were getting better, no doubt.
I mean, and then last season is when Kyler got hurt.
He got
right?
hurt,
So
right.
it was kind of over. I don't know. I was excited to hear it. It was a name that, frankly, wasn't on my radar. I don't know that I had an OC on my radar, but when I saw that deal fell through with the Raiders, and one of our guys that's a loyal listener, he is a huge Raiders fan, he said that it really wasn't about money. Kingsbury wanted to work with a young quarterback, and that's what was attractive
and
about
Kingsbury
coming
also
here.
seems like a guy who's he's perfect as an OC, probably not as a head coach.
Right.
Like
I think
some of these
OC is a
guys are
perfect
just
spot for
they
him.
max out at coordinator, and they're not very good at head coach.
Right.
And that's
Maybe
great
that's
for us.
what he is.
So there's this whole narrative that if your offensive coordinator does well, he's just going to bolt.
Right.
There may not be a huge claim. I do think at some point they'll probably give him another shot if he's uber successful, but it probably won't be right away.
And he got a 3-year deal. 3-year deal here in DC.
And all the Bieniemy backers, he can find a job elsewhere.
Sure.
A lot of people were still saying, well, why isn't Bieniemy being considered for offensive coordinator? They wanted to move on.
Yeah.
No, because he sucked.
They didn't want him.
And
I
it's
agree
clear.
with you.
No, he sucked.
But there's a lot of people who get upset.
They have a hard time accepting that.
Yeah.
Our guys over in Ref the District, I don't know if he sent you the same info. He sent me some info, because you know how I've said I think he should just go back to Colorado. Well, apparently he's had 2 coaching stints in Colorado. Okay, once as the running backs coach, and then later he was actually the OC in the early 2010s or whatever it was. And his offense, I don't have it right in front of me. It was something like 112 out of 120 and 114 out of 120. Okay, before then Andy Reid saved him. He just is not that great.
I think there are just
not
there's
that
a
great
section
at it.
listeners, and there were people there at the 106.7 The Fan versus Team 980 live event that were bringing up Bieniemy.
Yeah.
And I brought up the numbers all season long more than anyone. I was not impressed by Eric Bieniemy, but I think they were just drawn by the story and the persona that he's been passed over so many times, and they just want to give him excuses like, well, look what he had to work with. And that's somewhat fair. Or they gave you the Jacoby Brissett argument. Look what happened when Jacoby Brissett was under center.
There's a million ways to look at it. You just have to get over it. He's going
Correct.
somewhere else. He's gone.
I personally don't think he's that
Didn't
good.
work
It's a
out for
one-year
1 year,
experiment.
and it didn't work out.
Sometimes experiments fail.
And he wasn't the only reason it didn't work out.
No,
It was just part of it.
Right.
But it's got to move on.
Yes. And I get my
Went in a different direction.
I own this town case.
See, most importantly, there is your back.
Cannot be sharing my initials with anybody anymore.
The belle of the ball, though, a week ago or 2 weeks ago was Ben Johnson. Everybody wanted Ben Johnson. And Ben Johnson ultimately decided to stay in Detroit as the offensive coordinator. And there are some kind of behind-the-scenes reports as to why Ben Johnson may have decided to pull out. Whether you believe him or not, there's conflicting reports. But according to kind of Ben Johnson's side, he may have been turned off by the people that were interviewing him, saying that they were basketball guys, and he felt like they thought they were kind of know-it-alls, and he was somewhat turned off by that.
It's your classic he said,
Obviously
he
talking
said.
about, Bob Myers and Magic, and Josh Harris owns the Sixers. They don't really get into why he felt that way, but
I don't know. They're just slinging mud from both sides.
they really are.
Right,
So
like,
I
which
don't know
side
what to
would you
make of
believe?
it.
Yeah, it's hard. It's hard to like.
I literally don't know what to
I
make of
saw
it.
Jason Reed. I think it was Jason Reed.
He was blaming the Skins for leaking
He
stuff.
had a tweet, and I thought it did make logical sense. Like, it doesn't make logical sense for the Commanders to be all about interviewing him a second time if they say he bombed the interview.
Right.
Well, was the second
Because that's
interview-
the Commander side is, well, we didn't want Ben Johnson. He bombed the interview.
Yeah.
Well, hold on. Didn't they say they wanted to meet him in person. The first interview was over Zoom, right? So I don't think it's crazy to think, hey, we really like this guy.
Yeah.
Let's just give him the benefit. Give me the benefit of the doubt for a second.
Yeah.
We really like this guy. We don't really hit it off over Zoom. It was a little weird.
Yeah.
But we still want to meet him in person because he really is our top choice.
All right, maybe he's more dynamic in person than
I mean,
on
it's
Zoom.
not really fair.
It's possible.
And that makes all the sense in the world.
I
But
think that
they've
makes sense.
painted him in a light that they didn't like him. I would tend to side probably with Ben Johnson's side. I don't know because he did this last year. He pulled out. So he pulled out again. He just might be one of these guys that he needs all the stars to align, and for whatever reason they didn't align for him.
And remember the reports that he really wanted just the Charger job, and they decided to go with Harbaugh. So maybe he just wasn't interested in any of those other positions.
Man, I was desperate for the Commanders to have the Lions on their sched next season because that would have been good drama in theater.
Oh,
but they're
yeah.
not
They're
on
not
the
playing.
schedule.
Yeah.
No, not in 2024 at least.
But for whatever reason, it just just wasn't meant to be.
Yeah,
I don't know what to make of it,
Yep.
JP.
It wasn't meant to be.
Because both sides are slamming each other. I know everyone just assumes that Washington whiffed. I'm guessing that there was probably some mutual discomfort on both sides.
Yeah.
I think there probably was.
And let's say he didn't kill the interview. Part of that might have been it wasn't his first choice. If his first choice indeed was the Chargers,
yeah, maybe he punted the interview.
now
Maybe he
he's
just
like
didn't take it that
half-heartedly
seriously.
doing the interviews.
I think that's
And he's got a
possible.
good gig. He's making good money. He doesn't mind going back to the Lions and trying to finish unfinished business.
Right, and maybe next year, like we've said, there'll probably be another 5 or 6 openings, and maybe one of those will attract him, and he'll be set to finally move on.
He was in no rush to take the Commanders gig. That's the one thing that's clear. Or the Seattle gig.
Yeah.
Either one.
Mm-hmm.
He was fine
and you know
where
what?
he is.
You might have found a better guy anyway.
Yep. That's
The way I'm
definitely
looking at it.
possible.
True.
You bypass all these young offensive geeks, wizards, and but you've got a true, leader who's been there before and can just have those guys rally around, and maybe you have a better head coach than you would have if you had Ben Johnson.
It's possible.
And you still got an.
I like the trio.
Even
Still
though he was probably not your number one
You have
guy.
a relatively young OC now in Kingsbury. So I guess they like that setup better.
Yeah.
Well, listen, why do we want offensive guys? We want offensive guys because, we want to have some balance, but we want to throw the football. That's what this guy does.
Which I
Throws
love.
the football. I don't care his
threw
age.
the football too.
Huh?
Bieniemy threw the football
He did.
too.
He did, but there was no balance.
Yeah.
I think I heard the stats as I was driving in, and I read it last night, that there's this idea that Kingsbury doesn't run the ball either, but I think he finished like 10th, 11th, 9th.
Yeah, there
something
is
like
more
that.
balance to his rushing.
Various years in rushing. So
Now,
he
part of
doesn't
that
ignore
is
the run
buoyed
game.
by having a rushing quarterback in Kyler
Sure.
Murray. Or
By the way,
whoever
he's
that
only
is.
7 years younger than Quinn.
Yeah.
It's not this big age gap like Quinn hired this
about
young
45.
offensive.
Yeah, it's about 44, I think.
Well, Quinn's
Yeah.
our age.
Yeah,
He's
right.
53, born in 70.
And so he's, 45?
44, I believe.
Yeah. Perfect.
Yeah, I have no problem with it.
I
would have
the
loved them
trio.
to hire Tom Moore. He's still going at it at 84.
I am happy with the trio.
We'll see who the quarterback's coach is. That's usually, you don't end up talking about it that much, but that's supposedly be a big deal for
I think it is.
the quarterback room.
Yeah, I think it's definitely a big deal. I don't know if that guy Kavika was any good or not, but yeah. I think even the most ardent Skins haters have to say that even if you didn't like the Quinn hire, I think this mollifies you a little bit. You're going to like it a little bit more now that looking at this trio. We don't know much about Wit, but we just assume he and Quinn are on the same page.
I'm just going to trust that Quinn made a good choice there.
Yeah, he's worked with him 4 straight years.
Right.
He knows them as well as anybody. They must be on the same page.
Mm-hmm.
We saw what they did innovatively, moving Micah Parsons around, et cetera. We saw what they did where they took a guy like Bland to lead the league in pick sixes. Diggs, I thought, before he got hurt, had really improved as a DB. So, I don't know. I think it's pretty good.
You just have to trust that Dan Quinn knows what he's doing.
That's
what you got to do.
Do you like Dan Quinn better than Jack Del Rio at this point?
Yes.
And do you like Kingsbury
better than
Bieniemy?
Yeah, the answer is yes on both.
Yes on both. And I consider
for me.
Witt and Quinn kind of the same guy.
I'm sure a lot of people would disagree, but I like both of those choices better.
Yeah. I do too. All right, let's go to the phones if you want to chime in. 800-636-1067. I got a few minutes here. Let's go to Ed Hartford. Ed, what's up, buddy?
Hey, what's going on, guys?
Hey,
last night was a great night for Washington fans. Kliff, better than what we had. I'm sorry. I supported EB when he first got here. I thought he was going to do different things. I think a lot of people did. But it just didn't work out. And it's new ownership, new coach, and they knew that we had to go a different route. I like Joe Wit, too, because he worked with Dallas's defense under Dan Quinn. And like you guys said, I think they're just on the same page. They know they have pieces here. Maybe they can change, or help Emmanuel Forbes. And I know people hate this other name, but Benjamin St. Juste, maybe they can help them become something.
I like St. Juste.
And I think this is the other thing. I think Albert Breer said over the weekend, I'm not sure if you guys said this already, the reason Kliff pulled out was because the Raiders were offering him a 2-year, and he wanted 3 years. So he came to Washington and got his 3 years that he wanted, which I guess for him feels more secure. So that's why he pulled out of Oakland, which is what Albert Breer said. And then seconds after that, as you guys saw, he became the leading candidate to Washington, which he had already pretty much interviewed for. But, I'm happy with all these things. I know a lot of people don't like Dan Quinn, or some people think it's a retread. But the difference between Dan Quinn and Ron is Dan Quinn doesn't look checked out. He just has more energy on the sideline.
He looks fired up.
Like Ron Rivera.
Totally.
Yeah, Ron Rivera was taking naps on the sideline.
Yeah.
I mean, Jesus Christ. So thanks for taking my call. But I love these moves, guys, and I think we're heading in the right direction regardless of what happens this year.
Yep.